All right, let's dive into something that might just challenge a picture you've had in your head for a very long time. We're going to explore a completely different side of a central religious figure.
So when you hear that name, what's the first image that comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's a very specific, almost default image, one that's been shaped by centuries of art and hymns.
Yeah, usually it's someone pretty serious, solemn. We think of him as the man of sorrows, heavy, burdened, really defined by his suffering. But what if the original texts actually paint a totally different picture?
Because then you find this one kind of startling detail from the Gospels. It says he leapt for joy. And that creates a real contradiction, doesn't it? It makes you ask which one of these images is actually closer to the truth.
To figure that out, we've got to look at the evidence. So how do the Gospels really describe him? Let's start right at the very beginning of the story.
What's pretty amazing here is that from the get-go, joy isn't some minor detail. It's the headline. The announcement of his birth is literally good news of great joy. It's baked into the story from the very first page. Now here's where it gets really interesting. There's this one Greek word, charis. We usually see it translated as grace, but if you look at its root meaning, it's actually joy or delight. And this isn't just a fun fact. It totally reframes one of the most famous things ever said about him.
So instead of just being full of grace, this suggests he was literally full of joy. That means joy wasn't something he just felt once in a while. No, he arrived full of it. It was part of his very being from the moment he showed up.
And it wasn't just a starting point either. The text says he increased in joy. It was developmental. It's something that grew and matured in him right alongside his wisdom. It was a core part of him becoming whole.
Okay, this word is just fantastic. Agaliao. It's this incredibly vivid, active word for joy. It literally means to very much leap. It's not a quiet, internal feeling. It's an explosive, physical expression of delight.
And this is when he does it. Right in a moment when you'd think he'd be frustrated or discouraged, when people aren't getting his message, what does he do? He leaps for joy. It's this incredible moment of physical delight, all because he completely trusted his Father's plan.
So that brings up a huge question. If the Gospels are so packed with evidence of his joy, how on earth did we end up with the man of sorrows as our main image of him?
Right. Why is our go-to picture one of sadness? Well, the answer isn't really in the Gospels at all. It's about how one single, very powerful prophecy ended up overshadowing everything else.
And here it is. This verse from Isaiah, it's absolutely profound, and it's absolutely true. But the most important question to ask isn't if it's true, but when it's true. And this, right here, is the core of the whole misunderstanding. The prophecy was describing a specific, narrow window of time, his suffering on the cross. But tradition, it took that snapshot and turned it into a lifelong identity. Put it this way, Man of Sorrows describes a job he had to do, not the person he was. It was an assignment he took on, a heavy burden he carried for a purpose. It wasn't his personality.
And get this, joy didn't just vanish when the sorrow showed up. In fact, it was the very thing that got him through it. The book of Hebrews tells us he endured the cross because of the joy he knew was on the other side.
Okay, so what's the big deal? Why does any of this actually matter to us? How does changing our view from a sad Jesus to a joyful one really change anything?
Well, it kicks off this powerful chain reaction. You see, if you start to see Jesus as fundamentally joyful, that in turn reveals a joyful God. And that can completely transform how you experience faith, turning it from a heavy weight into a genuine delight.
Think about it. A joyful son can only come from a joyful father. This reframes our whole picture of God, not as some anxious, disappointed, serious figure, but as one who is confident, triumphant, and whose very nature is delight. And the result of that, faith stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like participation. Tension gets replaced by trust. That feeling of heaviness is no longer seen as some sign of being holy. And maybe most importantly, delight starts to feel appropriate again.
So, let's pull all this together. What does it really mean for us to try and recover this image of a joyful Christ?
First off, this doesn't take away from his suffering at all, not one bit. What it does is frame it. It gives that suffering profound purpose, but it doesn't let it define his entire existence. His suffering matters precisely because it was part of a much bigger story of joy. It all comes down to a simple idea, really. Good news is supposed to feel good.
When we restore this balance, we're just reminding ourselves of the core nature of the whole message.
And that's the final thought I want to leave you with. What actually changes, for you, for me, if joy, not sorrow, becomes the foundation of our understanding? How might that shift not just our beliefs, but our entire way of living?